Okay, Ray and Paul, I am so excited to have you on season 2 of AI Trust Talks today. I know I've spoken to you both previously, and of course, we need to make a shout out to Mariam as well, who was part of your book writing, and we will be touching on governing the machine and your reasons behind writing that book. And I'm excited for us to deep dive into that. So to get us started today, can I ask, Ray, I'll start with you, if you could give us a bit of background on your experience and expertise that you're bringing to the table today, and then Paul will kick off with you.
Emma, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to a very interesting conversation, judged by some of the questions I know you've got lined up. My career has always really been at the intersection of technology and application of technology in business. I've always been excited by what technology can achieve. What really moved me into the kind of AI governance, responsible AI space was seeing in particular, the wave of kind of data moving to analytics, moving to data science, moving to what we now call AI, increasingly powerful, increasing potential for organizations, and yet organizations being hesitant to adopt because of nervousness about where things could go wrong. And we started to see the initial issues arising around, let's say, bias and fairness in some of the algorithms, around use of data and privacy and so on. And that's when I thought, well, actually, I think this is going to become an even greater area of challenge. And we're going to miss out on the potential if we can't find ways to really govern the AI and give people confidence to use it. And that's when I switched my career. I was with Accenture at the time, running their data and AI practice in the UK. And that's when I switched over to focusing on responsible AI and then becoming the global lead for responsible AI at Accenture, working both internally, building the compliance program for AI for Accenture, but then also advising a lot of clients on that area until I left that role about 18 months ago to work with Paul and Miriam to write this book.
I know you're both part of the OG of the responsible AI space. Paul, I'd love to hear about your background and experience as well.
First of all, Emma, thank you very much for inviting us on today. Well, Emma, I think my experience with AI stretches way back to the early 90s when I did a degree in computer science at university. And I did a PhD in AI because I thought, wow, this is interesting. And it was actually in agentic AI, which is possibly really bizarre for people who think agentic AI is really new. It was the mathematical modeling of agentic AI. I then taught and did some research for a number of years. But in the late 90s, there were actually no jobs in AI. So I left academia and ended up working in the city in London. I worked for several banks, building complex enterprise-wide sort of big data systems and calculation systems. And then in about 2015-16, I started hearing a lot more about AI in the industry, in big tech companies, in Google and Netflix. I thought, this sounds interesting. I started looking into it and I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. It's really taking hold. But there's one particular aspect that I think is so important, which is how do you control AI? There are ethical risks, there are safety risks, there are security risks. There's all sorts of risks and downsides with AI. So I set about really working in banks to try and put responsible AI in practice. And that's where I met Ray, and Ray kindly invited me to join him in this project with Miriam. And then we set about writing the book. And I was so motivated to write about something that I feel passionate about. So it was a wonderful opportunity. And I've enjoyed every minute of it.
One of the things I love about having guests on the show is hearing people's expertise and experience. And I'm sure you get this question as well. People that want to get into the responsible AI space, it's talking about your journey and how you get there. And just hearing the diverse expertise people have is just incredible, that it's not just one direction people take to get into the responsible AI space. So you've both written, along with Mariam, governing the machine. So let's talk a bit about, what does responsible AI even mean? How do you define it? Some see it as a safeguard, others are as rhetoric. Where do you stand with this?
I think it definitely mustn't be rhetoric. And I'm sure there are some people who use the term and don't really follow through. But we're very much in favor of practical implementation of responsible AI. And so for us, responsible AI is about the development practices that you would use when building an AI system to ensure that it is going to be trustworthy. And then the other term that we kind of coin is AI governance. And for us, the AI governance is, if you like, the implementation framework So the responsible AI piece is setting out, what does good look like? How should you do it? But then it's no good having principles and good intentions if you don't actually execute. And that's often where the hard work is. And for us, that's what the AI governance framework is about.
Anything you wanted to add to that, Paul?
AI governance is what you need to ensure responsible AI. So AI governance refers to people in the organization and their roles, accountabilities, process steps you put in to what those people and their teams need to do. So things like operating procedures. And then finally, there's the technology element as well. So what technical tools can different teams utilize in order to implement those processes that are there to ensure responsible AI? So AI governance and responsible AI are really intertwined, but the governance part is far reaching and very wide. And a number of people in different roles need to come together to get the governance right to ensure their AI systems actually behave as intended and serve customers and do no harm. I think a lot of people on the outside might think it's just a compliance activity, but actually it really affects large parts of the organization. And we go to great lengths in the book to talk about these, especially in the early chapters.
I really like what you've said, talking about the people and the processes as well, because some people just think that it's either a technical control or just, sort of bare minimum compliance checklist type activity, but it's absolutely not. It's a lot broader than that. And one of the things your book highlights is the tension between risk management and innovation. And I know those of us that are in sort of the responsible AI roles, how much pressure there is to sort of go live and look into innovation. How should leaders navigate that balance between safety and innovation without slowing the progress?
I think it's partly a mindset shift. The way artificial intelligence systems nowadays are created, the so-called generative AI systems, the use of ChatGPT, which are called large language models, these have been built on such a vast scale. They're not interpretable. It's very hard to predict what they're going to say, what they're going to come up with, and what they're going to generate. And we know that there are risks like hallucinations, which there is no cure for this particular thing. It's there by design. And in fact, what gives rise to hallucinations is the thing that makes the system so powerful as well when it does work. And what I always try and say is, look, if you really want to invest in deploying AI, you need to equally invest in the governance things, because governance is about ensuring it doesn't do what you don't want it to do, and it only does what you do want it to do. So governance shouldn't be seen as an afterthought or just an additional kind of tax that organizations have to use to get their AI to it. It's really it's part of what makes the development teams create a good system. So you need to have those elements as part of we call it the AI lifecycle, right from when teams think of an AI system, think, oh, we've got a business problem, I think AI can solve it, right the way to building and then finally deploying and operating the AI. At all of those points, you need to check that the AI does what you want it to do and stops doing the things you don't want it to do. I think that's partly a mindset thing, and people have to accept that they have to invest in this thing called AI governance and the technologies and tools that we've talked about. I believe that if you do that, you will innovate, and you'll innovate with safety. You'll innovate with certainty, and you can demonstrate to your executives as well as to regulators that actually what you've done is good and will work and is robust and resilient and so on. So I actually think it can boost and accelerate innovation, but there is a cost, which is that you have to invest in this practice just as much as you might invest in AI, doing something really super that it's not done before. Invest in this as an additional set of steps that you need to put in developing AI.
Do you want to add to that, Ray?
No, I think Paul did a great job. I mean, that's exactly how I see it.
If a reader was to focus on one chapter or theme within the book Governing the Machine, which would you recommend and why?
I'd probably go for the one chapter that really summarizes our implementation approach. I think it's chapter 6, where we have the kind of framework, because the early chapters lay out the risks that we're typically dealing with, and we explain what those risks are. We talk about who might be accountable, who might drive the program, who's actually impacted by AI risks, and so on. That's the chapter where we kind of bring it all together. And then as we move on through the book, Paul picks up with sections on the sort of technical approaches to implementing that framework. There are sections on the people side of things and the process side of things, and then there are sections on the legal side of things as well, But I think it's that core framework. What we did was we looked at NIST, we looked at the UAI Act, we looked at things like the Monetary Authority of Singapore, OECD. We looked at a whole range of different frameworks. And what we found was a lot of overlap, a lot of commonality, but differences here and there. And what we tried to do was to distill what we felt were kind of all the best bits from those different systems, but also make them in a way that was easy enough to implement, that this would apply not just to big corporates, but it's something that also smaller and medium-sized businesses could kind of right size to suit their needs.
Frameworks are so critically important when we see these regulations and high-level principles talked about, but actually the doing and the how is where organizations really need help. Paul, do you have a particular chapter that you're passionate about?
Wow, that's a tricky question. I guess it's the one that I probably spent most time on, which is the controls that that an organization will need to implement to mitigate the 9 significant risks that we landed on. So Ray said we reviewed all of those documents. We came up and landed on 9 big themes of risk. The chapter that I spent most time on was all of the controls you need to implement. And many of them are at a technical level in that chapter. And as a software engineer and as a technical person who was programming in the 80s, I kind of enjoyed that one. And I enjoyed getting into reinforcement learning with human feedback and red teaming and all that kind of stuff. So that was my favorite.
I love it. And you describe responsible AI as a way to unlock potential. I know that there are really huge values in embedding responsible AI at the very start. How do you ensure that that ambition doesn't dilute accountability, which I think we sort of agree that accountability is quite a difficult principle that organizations need to apply and really adhere to?
This is one of the challenges that a lot of organizations face at the beginning of a program, and that is who's going to be involved. And we strongly believe that you have to involve lots of different parts of the organization. This isn't something that the technical team can do alone. It's not something that legal can do on their own. Compliance and risk, etc. It needs to be a collaborative effort. You need to have information security involved. You're going to need procurement. It's a long list of different teams that need to participate. And I think it's well worth investing the time up front, to your point, Emma, figuring out those accountabilities. Who is actually going to take the lead and kind of draw those teams together? And that needs to be a leader who has the credibility, the interest in the space, but also the ability to actually get people to work together, has some budget and so on. And then a key part to your question about accountability is making sure that there aren't gaps, that there are clear interlocks between those different departments. Where do we hand off between, let's say, a privacy data impact assessment, to what you might be doing in the AI space, to what the information security team might be doing, and so on. So how is that going to work seamlessly, but without duplicating and making people go through the same set of questions for 2 or 3 different departments, which obviously would be highly frustrating.
And I know with sort of big organizations that can tend to happen. I think one thing I'd add to that, Ray, is someone that has the authority to hit that kill switch if it goes wrong, or the one that's willing to stand up and sit behind or stand up behind that particular machine and say, yes, I'm putting my name to this because I've checked that everything's going and should be working as expected. Would you add anything to that, Paul?
No, I think Ray's summed it up really well. I mean, the only thing maybe worth mentioning is it looks like AI is here to stay and continue to grow. So there is potential for many business areas. There is potential to deploy this, and a lot of it is about unlocking that potential, but ensuring you've done it safely. So I think the appetite is there, and many organizations are going to say, we want an AI strategy. We think it can really help. So, again, you need this as part of that. So I think the demand will be there.
Emma, if I can just follow up on your point there about who's going to take accountability for an individual system rather than, let's say, for the program. I think what we see working best is if that is actually a business owner. Occasionally there's a temptation to have someone in the technical team hold that accountability, but actually I think it works best if whoever is the business sponsor for a particular product or service, they obviously need input and help from the technical teams to understand the relevant risks and what have you. But ultimately, I think it works best when that business owner is the one who is accountable for saying, yes, we've looked at the risks, we've weighed all the inputs, etc. we see the value this is going to bring, we're going to go ahead and we stand behind it.
And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of data ownership because that's a whole nother episode. But the business owner who also owns that particular data, that particular client segment is the right business leader for that.
Exactly.
And so I want us to talk a bit more about challenges because we know there are some or a lot in responsible AI. We hear about principles like bias, explainability, reliability, sustainability, and these are often cited as risks as well. But do organizations risk treating them as buzzwords unless they're tied to real measurable outcomes?
They're certainly not buzzwords. So we go to great length to illustrate with examples in the early sections of the book these issues occurring in real life situations. So I think that's really important to make it tangible to our readers to see, look, here's where there was bias in a system and it caused harm. Here's where you needed explainability, but you can't because AI through these models is probabilistic. And in some cases, it's pretty much non-deterministic, so you can't always predict what the AI system will give you as an answer. And sustainability, I mean, that seems to be the most talked about topic at the moment as the world accelerates AI adoption and data centers are being constructed all over the world. People are asking about water depletion, strain on energy grid infrastructure, increased carbon emissions. I get asked that question all the time. And again, we illustrate issues there. So they are real harms. They are tangible. What we talk about in the organization is you need to be aware of them and you need to be aware of where they might occur in an AI system that you deploy. Measuring them, there are ways of measuring them, actually. Some of these can be measured so you can see what you need to do. But ultimately, it depends on an organization, as Ray said, the chapter 6, which talks about an organization's values, principles, policies. That's the engine through which they can define what the organization needs to do to manage those risks, even in the absence of any measurable outcomes. Because there will be harms with systems that are deployed at scale if organizations don't pay attention to this. I mean, and I have to say to you, Emma, I actually get so many people that want to understand and learn this. They really, really want to avoid this. So very few people say to me, in fact, I'm struggling to understand, or struggling to recall if anyone has said, oh, that's not important, Paul. The fact that we can't explain how a system works is not a problem. No, I don't think I've ever heard that. And of course, there's the regulators as well. So in banking, I guess we can talk about a bit more in detail. There's a regulatory angle here where regulators are saying you have to. There's the EU AI Act. There's legislation that says people's fundamental rights need to be looked after. That discrimination needs to be eliminated. So even if companies don't have a choice, they would still have to pay attention to this through that mechanisms. So I'm really glad to say I don't get many people saying to me they're buzzwords.
You raise a really good point, Paul, when you talk about regulations. So yes, we've got the EU AI Act, but then in jurisdictions where there might not be regulations, it doesn't mean there's no regulations. There is discrimination laws, and whether a human does it or a machine does it, we still need to look into it and manage it. So it's not like we need brand new regulations just to do the right thing. To a degree, it is there. And I just want to touch a bit more on regulation, especially in sectors like banking. Is responsible AI at risk of becoming a compliance exercise rather than a genuine cultural shift? And I know we've talked a bit about this already, but if so, what steps can be taken for a needed cultural shift? It's such a big requirement when we're really looking at doing responsible AI properly.
Yeah, that's a good question, Emma. Yes, I think there is a risk. There is a risk that people will view this as a compliance exercise, and it's something you do just before you deploy an AI system. Book's aim is really to change that mindset, right? And all of the work we've done to go through this talks to what needs to be done. What can organizations really do, though, to kind of, I guess, move the dial on this? And really appointing someone at the executive level that's either someone like a chief AI officer or a chief responsible AI officer or just a chief AI officer. It's to give them the remit to understand the business's aims, understand and create an AI strategy if the business needs one, but then also to take account of how responsible AI would be implemented through governance. We believe those kind of roles are really necessary. Glad to say that there's, through various surveys, you can see large organizations now deploying people with that remit. I'm hoping, and certainly I'm seeing it, that cultural shifts are happening. But really it's about podcasts like this, it's about us telling the stories and really working with people to help them to understand this. I'm really fortunate in this role that I do as head of responsible AI at NatWest Bank, and before that at Lloyds Bank in the UK. I had many, many people that would come to me and they would want to know how to deal with this. They've heard of bias, and they want to understand how can we avoid that. And many organizations typically would be concerned about things like reputational risk, which is a real possible negative outcome. So there's no appetite of wanting to hear about this. Even with regulations on one side, I think there's actually a deep-seated view certainly in many of the people I talk to, that they want to deal with this and they don't want to cause harm to people. They don't want unfairness coming out of their systems. If anything, what I see mostly from the people I talk to is they want to do this, they want to work on this.
Just talking about job titles, I know when I started this the responsible AI space about 5 years ago, I was like the only one in the UAE that had that job title, and it was a bit lonely. But Ray, you were one of the first people I spoke to, and for various different reasons. So it's good to see other jurisdictions picking up on this, and it's definitely an up and coming role, and organisations are seeing that value as well. Did you want to add anything to that, Ray?
Maybe I'll just give you an example to illustrate that point that Paul made about there being real demand from individuals to get involved and to understand more. So I sit on the AI Ethics and Governance Council for an organisation called the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman in the UK. So this is a sort of medium-sized organisation. It handles complaints about the way that local authorities and social care in the community is done. So it's a very sensitive topic area. These are the complaints are people who really feel they've suffered some grievance, and it can be life-changing, for them. The team thought that there would be areas where they could apply AI in the administrative side of things. They established a set of principles. The number one principle is humans make all decisions. The AI is there to help, but it is not going to make any decisions. Nothing's fully automated, etc. And as they started to engage with their colleagues, discuss where there might be potential for AI, they found that there were a lot of people who were sort of nervous and didn't know much about AI and so forth. And so what they did was they put together a 4-hour in-person training, and they mandated that for every single member of the organization. And they were a little bit nervous. The people would push back and say, well, I don't have time to spend 4 hours. I've got to come into the office. I've got to waste half a day, etc. Quite the opposite. They were overwhelmed. Their first session was massively oversubscribed, and people were clamoring to find out more. And they did a little survey before and after that session about people's understanding and comfort level with AI. And before the session, it was around the 20 to 30% mark. And after the session, it was over 90%. And I think that just really shows that people want to understand, they want to embrace this in the right way. And I don't think enough organizations take enough time to really help people through that process.
This is such a good example, not only kind of bringing it really down to earth and talking about the impact to society if we do get it wrong, but also the literacy side of things. And I agree, I think there's not enough done on the literacy side of things within organizations to balance, hey, these are the benefits, these are the great tools we're going to give you and everything, the ways that you can use it effectively, but also here are the risks and here's how we want you to mitigate them to a degree. Lots more work in the literacy space needed. So let's talk a bit about leadership. If leadership commitment is central, what happens when leaders don't prioritize responsible AI? Should regulation step in more forcefully, or does that risk stifling innovation?
Paul may have a view on this as well, but let me start. I think about two different types of risk, or two different category, if you like, of risk. One category are things where there's an obvious self-interest for an organization not to make a mistake. And those are the things that, are going to lead to bad headlines and so forth. And I actually think most organizations are quite attuned to that, and they don't want it to happen. They don't want mistakes to happen and so forth. And so I'm kind of slightly less worried about those areas as long as people put in place the right governance program. But then you do have another category of risks, which are ones where there's really no economic incentive for individual organizations. So I'm thinking about things like the impact of fake news, thinking about maybe mental health impact on people who are becoming over-reliant on chatbots and so forth. And I think it's in these areas that, in particular, we need regulation, because otherwise these are going to get out of control, I think.
I think, Ray, you've got it spot on. It's about incentives, and organizations will be motivated to put in whatever they need to do to ensure that they continue to thrive. But where there are externalities involved, which are knock-on impacts or wider impacts, I think regulators do need to step in. If AI is as pervasive as we think it might be, it will be in all areas of our life, our professional lives, so the impact to colleagues at work, in our personal lives, impact to society and families. The impacts are so wide-ranging. I hope we've collectively learnt the lessons of not really regulating some big tech companies, especially social media companies. And there have been, many cases of documented harm to young people. I really hope that governments step in the right way for those kind of risks as well. They're not all corporate risks, right? They're not all risks that come, but it's really kind of wide-ranging. So I think there's, the literacy piece, I think, if I just touch on that, is so important. It's so important to educate society over what this AI stuff is and what it should and shouldn't be used for, and the potential harms. And unfortunately, there is a lot of hype in the industry. There's a lot of headlines that are grabbed from big corporations, and I think there needs to be more of the reality on the ground hitting the headlines.
I agree, and it doesn't matter if you are a parent or if you have parents. We really need to educate them all, whether it be children or the elderly, just like we educate the elderly on scams and, don't answer that phone call or don't
Exactly.
respond to that email, and really bringing that to life. And I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, we have had some instances of AI going wrong and harms being caused. And we need to all be at the forefront to really stop those and help protect society going forward. So I want us to talk a bit about lessons learned. So Ray, you've led AI compliance at scale. What cultural or organizational barrier surprised you the most?
I guess perhaps how difficult it can be sometimes to find the person or department or team that's going to lead. I strongly believe that you need a coalition of lots of different areas of the business, but finding the right person who's going to actually lead it and drive it and have the accountability and, all those things that are necessary to make the program work, that can be challenging. It depends on the organization. Sometimes there's an obvious candidate who steps up and says, hey, I really believe in this. I'm passionate about it. I'm going to take it on. And that's fantastic. But that doesn't always happen. So that's perhaps one area. Another one that I guess I didn't find surprising, but is perhaps worth calling out, is the fact that, of course, there will be a tendency on the part of some teams to try to describe their product or service in a way that means it avoids the need for going through any assessments, right? By indicating that it doesn't have AI, or it's not really AI, or it's not high risk AI according to the criteria or whatever.
Or data sources have no private data or
Exactly. There's lots of ways you can kind of try and avoid the right checks. And we lay a lot of emphasis in the book on what we call checkpoints. And that's basically identifying these points in processes where you can just ask some direct questions about what the system is going to do, what kind of data it uses, etc., in order to determine, is this really an AI system according to the organization's definition? And obviously there are different ways it can be defined. And then also, well, what's it really going to do? And therefore, is this high risk, or is it something that's trivial? And we don't need to put it through a bunch of different checks and tests.
And I just want to touch on this a bit. You talk about controls and the governance frameworks you've put in the book. Have you also mentioned around what stage in the life cycle those controls should apply?
Paul, do you want to take that one? That's
Yeah,
your
no, yeah,
favorite topic, I think.
yeah, absolutely. So we talk about controls. It's quite a generic word, but controls can be qualitative or quantitative. And in the qualitative camp, you'll have things like, I guess the primary one that I go to is an ethics council, or I should say AI ethics committee. Their responsibility is really early on in the AI kind of life cycle, even before the system's developed, is to convene that meeting with people from different perspectives, looking at the use case to see if there is any likelihood of some unexpected risks occurring. Typically, your business owner who's come up with a use case probably won't be paying so much attention to that bit because they'll be very much focused on the business case. So it's the job of something like an AI ethics committee or a council to look at that and challenge and try and determine if there is a possibility. And if there is, to work with development teams to embed controls, which could be then quantitative controls, which are the technical tools in platforms you use to build AI. Tools like Google's Vertex platform or AWS Bedrock platform. There are tools and libraries, Python libraries, that can be implemented there to surface metrics that show whether or not there is bias. And how explainable the system is, and so on and so forth. So I think the combination of qualitative tools and quantitative tools brought in the AI model lifecycle is what we talk about in the book. And we go to some length to lay out when they might be. And as Ray said, some of these are checkpoints. So you can clearly say when they should occur in that whole life cycle.
So you've raised a really good point that I'd like to deep dive into a bit. So an AI ethics council could also be called sort of a responsible AI council or AI safety council, being in place before development occurs. Do you then have an additional committee? In my experience, asking questions around, is this even ethical before we start building, is imperative. And let's kind of deep dive into what the business case really is, what outcomes we expect or we want to work with, and then decide if there's an ethical practice before, and then post development, looking at through a council. Would you say a council steps in before development or after development before go live?
Oh, as early as possible is our recommendation. Partly to avoid, I guess, kind of wasted investment and sunk cost. Some of the risks that might emerge or be identified by the council, it would be good to know those ahead of time before the developers engage in all the hard work, so they put in the controls at the right point in time and surface answers through testing to maybe an independent team like an audit team or even my team, and say, look, here's kind of demonstration that we've mitigated the risk of bias, or that we put something in to allow explainability, and so on and so forth. So we definitely recommend doing them early on. There are certain nuanced cases as well. So, for example, is your AI ethics council a kind of a business ethics council? Are we there to really look at the use case from a business ethics point of view? Now, there's no one answer to land on, but it certainly comes into the mind of the people on the council is, should we even be doing this at all? That's not about explainability or bias. It's kind of at a higher level. So we different firms have different ways of dealing with that. We certainly deal with it on a much more technical level to mitigate the 9 risks that we've talked about. We would expect the business owner to have already verified the business case. But it varies by organisation. Some organisations might even have a customer representative on their ethics board or ethics committee to see, what the customer view might be before the product's even launched. And maybe that's more of a business ethics one. But certainly an open question, Emma.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. The customer experience team who deals with customers all the time, are they even part of the AI decision making, right? Or the council or committee, whatever it might be. They know the feedback from the customers, they know the customer experience today, and what's their viewpoint on the tool you're going to roll out next. So I think it's really a great topic for us to just cover off then, because so many organizations that are looking at really how do they operationalize AI governance, responsible AI, to really touch on the points about council. So thank you for deep diving into that a bit more. Paul, I want to stay with you. So you've embedded responsible AI in financial services. What's the most unexpected reaction you've had from executives or regulators?
I think the one thing that actually surprises me, as a technical person, I appreciate how large language models and generative AI works. There's various ways of saying this, but these systems really predict one token at a time. The most simplistic level of description is that, and each token is part of a word. So your large language model doesn't really understand language. It doesn't really understand what it is doing in the way that humans understand. And I think this is a really, really important point. These AI systems don't have intelligence the way that you or I would ascribe intelligence to humans. And I think that's such an important distinction, because there is a tendency for, I guess, some people who don't understand that to think, AI is so convincing. Let's look at ChatGPT. Look at that. Wasn't it absolutely amazing? It's kind of unfortunate that AI answers through ChatGPT and language models like that are so plausible that it almost entices us to think, wow, this has superhuman capabilities. It really is intelligent. It's not, and we should really be aware of that. It's not going to solve all of our problems. For some business processes, certainly in large organizations, our business processes are complex. We have people that work in roles that circumvent issues with systems they work with. There's all manner of things that happen in organizations that are trying to achieve something. You can't just throw an AI thing at it. Oh, no, we'll throw AI at it. That'll solve it. It's really not that straightforward. Some of your chatbots like ChatGPT, where it's kind of at the consumer level and you can ask it fairly straightforward questions. I could see real examples there where it's useful. But when you really get to want to embed Gen AI within large organizations where there's thousands of people employed, thinking that it's suddenly going to magically give you lots of efficiencies, or I really think, Emma, there's a long, long way to go on that. With that in mind, how do you deal with that? And it comes back to the learning and development and the education piece. So just as important it is to I think, educate people who are non-technical on how to work with AI, it's just as important to work with our executives who really make these big investment decisions on what are the limitations of AI, how does it really work, and you can explain that non-technically, so that you can help them make wise investment decisions. I think that's my lesson learned from working in FS.
I think that's fantastic. AI won't solve everything, but let's help executives to understand where it really could help them and leverage and bring power to the organization and support the business needs. Ray, I want to come back to you. Can you share an example where responsible AI principles didn't deliver as expected and what that actually taught you?
I think perhaps one would be the importance of making sure that your principles as an organization really speak to the core values and the activities of your organization. I've seen some organizations just kind of take a standard set of AI principles off of the internet, and there's quite a few out there, good ones in principle, but you need to tailor them to your own business. If you imagine, you're working in a life sciences company versus a bank versus a chemical company, people there are used to a different set of values that are really put front and center in terms of how they carry out their day-to-day work. And for AI principles to really speak to them and to make sense in their context, I think it's important that they really do get framed around the core values of the organization. Otherwise, there's more of a temptation for people to just see them as they're words on a piece of paper. They don't actually mean anything for our organization because they don't really speak to me.
I think that's a good point in adapting, whether it be principles or governance, it really is organization specific. You can't just sort of plug and play into the next organization. And some of the conversations I've been having in regulated industries like banking, we have ERMF frameworks or enterprise risk management frameworks that we must stick to. Some of the smaller organizations don't have that strict regime as a basis where you could sort of plug and play some AI controls, etc., around that. So it's a very good insights there. So I want to kind of move now into some of the future risks and governance gap we might see. What do you see as the biggest blind spot organizations still have when it comes to responsible AI?
I refer to it as sort of sustainable AI, and it's something that is talked about a little bit in the book, but the full chapter didn't make it into the book. And it's really back to the environmental concerns and the potential environmental harms of AI use at scale. Even organizations, I have a sense that in the future, the prolific use of AI, especially the so-called agentic AI, the compute demands for that are going to be absolutely massive. And I think much more so than many people really understand at the moment. But this is all based on numbers of tokens produced by the AI and intermediate reasoning that these systems have. And certainly if we look at how many data centers are being built, and even our big tech companies have acknowledged that the grids aren't big enough and powerful enough, so they're investing in nuclear power stations, right? They're buying the sources of creating the energy to power their data centers. I mean, they've looked at this, I'm sure, very, very carefully. Now, with that in mind, I think all organizations are going to put a great amount of strain on data centers. What does that mean for your organization? How does it tie in to our emissions disclosures, which many organizations have to provide? And what does it really mean for certain goals for reducing emissions that we've all signed up for through the Paris Climate Summit some years ago? That's at the forefront, I think, of so many people's minds Wherever I go, whenever I do a talk, it's guaranteed there'll be a question like that comes forward. So I think, look, organizations should maybe consider monitoring and being able to understand what their impact is of their use of AI on things like energy and climate, number
Mm.
one. And I think number two is then potentially take active steps to minimize that, ensuring that their deployed AI remains responsible within risk tolerance. And there are trade-offs between these two, which we mention in the book. So I think responsible AI needs to include the sustainability aspects of AI operations within risk management. There's lots of work to do on that, right? There isn't a framework out there that you can go and, find and say, right, we've got it. But I urge organizations to have a look at that. And that's certainly something that I'm working on at the moment.
That's fantastic. I know it's such a critical point for organisations to really start thinking about and doing something about it as well. Ray, I would like to come to you. With generative AI and agentic AI rapidly evolving, do you think current governance frameworks are already lagging behind?
The overall governance process and framework and approach that we outline in the book, for example, and that we see people implementing, from a process and framework standpoint, it's able to cope with agentic AI. I mean, we deliberately tried to design something that can move with the times, it can evolve, but clearly there are a lot of specifics in there, right? About what kind of controls you need for each type of use case, for each type of AI that you deploy. And there, agentic AI is at the forefront. It's at the cutting edge. So clearly, it's the one where there is the least amount of research that has yet been conducted, the fewest tools and so on. There are things out there, but it is definitely the one where the most work remains to be done to try to keep it on the rails and delivering what we expect. And I think Paul would probably agree with me that this is an area where we do have concerns about potential risks of things going wrong with agentic AI, because there are a number of reasons why it will multiply the risks that we see with generative AI on its own or traditional AI. And of course, the fact, as its name suggests, that it's agentic, the fact that it can actually execute things on your behalf, the potential impact of something going wrong is worse than it just, let's say, recommending some text, and then it's up to you whether you do or don't execute what has been said.
I think that's a really important point. And I want to ask you both a personal perspective question before we move to our signature last question. What's one misconception about responsible AI that you'd like to see challenged?
That's a good question, Emma. To those people that say, oh, it's optional or it doesn't really apply to us, we're using AI in a really dull, low stakes environment and so on. I think there are definitely cases where it does apply, where you have to put in certain controls, if nothing else, for your own teams to understand the capability of their systems and where it could go wrong, where they might not be resilient. So it's not all about the effects on society and so on. There's some real gotchas with AI. These probabilistic systems, they don't repeat the same answer. They're sometimes not resilient. A slight change in a prompt, very slight, could reveal a completely different answer. For those people who think, oh, well, it doesn't really apply to us, I challenge that one.
I like that. Ray, any thoughts from you?
There is a view from some people that responsible AI governance is going to slow down the adoption of AI. My view is that you have to embed it from the beginning. So it is more likely to slow things down if it's a checklist that's put on the end, because then you haven't built things in the right way. And then somebody does some checks at the end, and then, we find some problems with the system, and then we have to go back to the beginning. But if you have it through the development lifecycle, embedded as the way that you think and do develop AI, then it shouldn't impede the speed of moving forwards. And then secondly, you absolutely need trust for people to adopt AI. That's trust from the teams within your organization. It's trust from customers, trust from investors, regulators, etc. And the way to get trust is actually by knowing that you have asked all the right questions, you've done the right tests, you've taken all the steps possible to make sure that this is not going to go wrong and do things that you haven't anticipated.
Thank you for raising the topic of trust on AI Trust Talks. That might be a really good answer for the last signature question we normally have, which is, what's one belief in AI and trust that you hold, even if it's unpopular? Did you want to supplement anything else? And Paul, did you want to add to that question?
Ray, could you answer first? I'll make that question 20 seconds of thought before I dive in.
I genuinely think that trust is critical. And I guess maybe just to supplement in one way, right? There are different ways that we can trust things. We can trust things because we ourselves are expert enough, or we understand how it works, so we can do that analysis, that assessment ourselves, right? But then we trust other systems that we don't understand. I get in, an airplane, and I'm happy that somebody flies it. I don't know the ins and outs of how the airplane works, but I trust that the safety authorities have imposed the right standards, that the pilot is properly qualified and trained, that there's air traffic. This system, I trust it to look after me and keep me safe. And I think it's that which we need to have with AI, where a consumer looks at it and says, okay, I trust that the right kinds of regulations are in place, that the people who develop this have got the right kinds of qualifications. There's a question there, right, about, should there be more explicit qualifications, outward signs that an organization has got the right kinds of governance and tests in place through kite marks or independent assurance certificates and these sorts of things, so that I, as a consumer, can say, yeah, okay, I don't really understand how this AI thing works, but enough other people who I trust have given this the tick and the okay, so I should be happy using it.
Paul, what would you like to add to that?
It comes back to some conversations I've had before. You don't really trust a house, but you trust the architect that designed it. You don't trust a bridge, but you trust the civil engineers that designed and built and constructed it. So trusting the AI, that's not what we do. We trust it in a way because we believe what's behind it, the organization that produced it, the standards it complies with, and maybe even the regulatory regime around it, that is solid. Therefore, you kind of trust what it produces. So there's a bit of a, just wanted to build on what Ray said. I think it comes back to something I mentioned earlier, the hype around AI. You'll hear, and it's often big tech CEOs, AI is going to transform the world. There's going to be organizations with a CEO and then 1,000 agents. That's going to be the whole and all of these, I guess, is grandiose kind of statements. And I believe there are some people that, are quite scared of stuff like that. There will be many people who are not technical savvy that don't work in AI. And that's the vast majority of people probably looking at this thinking, wow, what does that mean for my future? What does that really mean for me? I think we need conversations around how can we, as employees, use AI to do a better job? How can we work with that? How do we make AI better for us? So really giving agency to people and their roles, and thinking of new roles, and new roles will emerge with AI. They have in other revolutions that we've had before. What are the new roles, and how can I create them? And maybe that's a question for executives. How can we create new roles in this new age of AI everywhere and so on? And I would like to see much more conversations around that, and less conversations around AI is going to transform everything. And, we're going to have these silly companies running around with one person at the top. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's
I love that.
Yeah, the one belief about AI that I wish people would stop talking about.
Definitely. Those of us in RAI, we don't want to hear about the hype. Ray, Paul, it's been so fantastic to have you on AI Trust Talks today. For our listeners today, we will link in to the distributing channels where we post the episode. But where can they find Governing the Machine book? Amazon?
Yep, it's on Amazon. It's on most, as they say, most good booksellers will have it, but Amazon certainly is a good place to go. Yeah, it's also published by Bloomsbury, and you can get it from Bloomsbury from their own website.
And you get it in audio format, hardback, and the electronic version as well. It's available in all formats.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I know that you would have given some really, really good insights to our listeners, understanding and wanting to understand about how we actually operationalize responsible AI, and they'll look forward to reading your book, Governing the Machine.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Emma.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of AI Trust Talks. If you found it valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with anyone who might be interested. Join the conversation with us on Instagram at AI_trust_talks, and follow along on Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Your engagement helps us to keep these important discussions alive. From all of us here at AI Trust Talks, thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep building trust where it matters the most.